The economic system shall not be operated in such a manner as to permit the concentration of wealth in the hands of a few individuals. And the state shall abolish all corrupt practices and abuses of power. But every Nigerian knows that these noble ideas have yet to be translated into a reality that is enjoyed by every Nigerian. Now, one set of explanations may, I believe, be found in looking at how other countries which have started their journeys in a comparable position have fared in intervening years. These comparisons, I know, can be uncomfortable. A constant theme of British political debate during the 20 years from the mid-60s to the mid-80s was about why we were lagging behind our other European competitors, Germany, France and Italy, who had started well behind us when the Second World War ended, but by then had overtaken us. Britain, it was claimed, had lost a nation, but had lost an empire, but had failed to find a role. And in Britain, we all got very irritated about the better examples that were shown to us from across the water. For a nation as proud as the United Kingdom, there was sometimes a collective sense of humiliation and of impotence. But after some difficult years, the decisions of the Thatcher and then the Blair administrations, in their different but complementary ways, bore fruit. We still have many problems, of course, but there's a self-confidence around today in the United Kingdom that was certainly not there in those previous decades. We can now look others in the eye. For a comparison relevant to Nigeria, let us look at the I in that acronym MINT. Let us look at Indonesia. Of course, Indonesia is different from Nigeria. Indonesia has 60 million more people spread out not over one contiguous landmass, but over 17,500 separate islands. Islam is the dominant religion in Indonesia, but there are sizable Christian, Buddhist, and Hindu minorities. There are nonetheless sufficient common factors for sensible comparisons to be made between Indonesia and Nigeria. Indonesia is even more ethnically and linguistically heterogeneous than is Nigeria. Both countries have a colonial past. Both have a presidential system of government, and whilst you have 36 states, Indonesia, as it happens, has 33 provinces. Both countries have a history of military government. Both are oil producers, though Indonesia on a significantly smaller scale. Both face serious internal security and terrorist challenges. In 1965, 5 years after Nigeria's independence, Indonesia's GDP per head was well below that of Nigeria. It's now above it. Even if one takes the higher of the internationally recognized estimates of Nigeria's GDP of $2,800 per head and uprates that by the possible 60% which may come through the rebasing of Nigeria's GDP, Nigeria's GDP is still below Indonesia's at $5,100 per head. And Indonesia has managed to diversify its economy more effectively, moving from an over-reliance on hydrocarbons to becoming a major exporter of agricultural produce. The biggest difference, highlighted in the comparative studies of Indonesia and Nigeria that I have read, concerns income inequality. There's an index coefficient called the Gini coefficient for measuring differences in income and in a nation. And without going into the maths, which actually it's pretty simple, if everyone shares the income equally, then the coefficient is 0. If one person has all the wealth, then the coefficient is 1, and you can gross those up from 0 to 100 if you want. The World Bank uses an index not from 0 to 1, but from 0 to 100, but it makes the same point. On this Gini coefficient, income inequality in Indonesia is 34. It's classed as medium. It's exactly, by coincidence, the same as for the United Kingdom. Now, 34 is not particularly impressive for either Indonesia or for the United Kingdom, and income inequality is certainly a big political issue in the UK, and I dare say it is in Indonesia too. Contrast in the egalitarian, prosperous, and well-governed Sweden, there's a score of 25 on the Gini coefficient. But income inequality here in Nigeria is stark. High in the World Bank's judgment at 48. And many studies, whether comparative or otherwise, attribute a significant part of Nigeria's problem of governance and the brake with which these problems put on fully developing its potential to this high level of inequality. The wealth concentrated in too few hands here has created an elite which has a vested interest in maintaining its position. You don't need me to tell you this. It's why there is such a disconnection between those noble ideals of Chapter 2 of your Constitution and the reality on the ground confirmed by the World Bank data. Now, maintaining their position of wealth, income, and then power is what elites do across the world if they are left unchecked. One way of looking at Britain's political history is through such a prism. In the 13th century, the struggle was at the highest level of the elites, with the barons demanding that the king, King John, should make himself more accountable to them on the next tier down. The result was the Magna Carta. We celebrate its 8th centenary next year. Magna Carta didn't start its life as a democratic instrument, not remotely. Its existence made no difference to the vast majority of English people trying to survive the harsh conditions of the 13th century. But this document, Magna Carta, took on a life of its own. It grew in importance. It became a standard text against which the actions of kings and queens, of the elites, were to be measured. We had a bloody civil war in the 17th century, an existential struggle which engulfed not just the elites, but the whole country, people of all classes. Killing 1 in 10 adult males in England, the English Civil War was underpinned by the religious confessional divide between the Protestants and the Catholics. But above all, it was an intensely political struggle with the elite about where power in our society should lay, between an absolutist monarchy and the parliamentarians. Now, the resolution of this struggle didn't end with the execution of Charles I in 1649, nor with the restoration of the monarchy in 1660, but 3 decades later with the promulgation of our Bill of Rights in 1689, which laid the ground for what today is our reasonably well-functioning democracy. But it did take another 2.5 centuries to get there. Article 8 of our Bill of Rights asserts that the election of members of Parliament ought to be free. The even more important Article 9, the foundation of sovereignty of Parliament, says that the freedoms of speech and debates or proceedings in Parliament ought not to be impeached or questioned in any court or place out of Parliament. Now, until the middle of the 19th century, our elites did seek to maintain their position of power by conflating the idea of universal suffrage with the rule of the mob. Democracy was a dirty word. Until the late 19th century, elections in Britain were corrupt on a breathtaking scale. With a limited electorate, just 1/10 of today's 46 million, more money in real terms was expended on elections than is permitted on our very tight rules on election campaigning today. There was even a secret vote of £1 million in today's money, used by the government chief whip to bribe MPs and to bribe voters alike to get the right answer from them. Now, we've been lucky in the United Kingdom. We've had the time and space to develop our democratic system over the centuries. And meanwhile, I say parenthetically, whilst we were puffing ourselves up with pride about Westminster being the mother of parliaments, we were imposing our will on peoples across the world, not by free vote, by force of argument, but by force of arms.